So today we're here with Dr. Rosslyn Biggs and Dr. Justin Talley from the Oklahoma State University, both in the Department of Veterinary Medicine. And both you guys are entomologists, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, Dr. Talley is the entomologist. I'm the veterinarian.
Okay.
Dr. Talley is with the College of Agriculture and then Extension. We're both with Extension, so that's where we overlap.
Okay. Great. And I think like what I found was an article that featured Dr. Biggs that talked about ticks and pets and the activity of ticks, during certain times of the year. So I want to kind of talk about that as part of our interview today. Thank you both for being here. It's really cool. We've talked to a bunch of people around the country, and I just thought, like, you guys kind of in the Midwest, so we haven't focused on that that much. So what's a little bit of your backgrounds, like Dr. Biggs? How did you get interested in veterinary medicine and wind up at OSU?
Sure. So I am actually a second generation veterinarian, second generation Oklahoma State veterinarian. We have to make sure we get that right today because we play the other university in Oklahoma Saturday. And so for all our football fans, you need to wear orange and root for the Cowboys on Saturday. So good. I graduated right here at Oklahoma State University, both from the College of Ag as well as veterinary medicine, and I was in a very rural mixed practice. Saw lots of ticks, lots of tick-borne disease while I was in practice. I then moved to the USDA and finished my time there, focusing on international exports, where we also worried about ticks too, in both going outbound and inbound with animals and animal products. And then I joined the College of Veterinary Medicine and Oklahoma State Extension a little over 2 years ago.
Great, nice to know. Dr. Talley, how about you? How did you wind up in this field?
Yeah, so I grew up on a farm and ranch in Texas. Several summers, my father, as a farmer, offset his consulting costs to farm me out to the consultant, which was a pest management consultant, and that kind of piqued my interest into entomology and pest management. Went to West Texas A&M for both my bachelor's and master's, and then received my PhD from Kansas State University in entomology, specifically veterinary entomology, mainly focusing on large animals, pest management, and large animal systems.
Yeah, which is a big deal, I think, probably in lots of parts of the country, people working in that field, and really important, although, from our standpoint, sort of as a clothing manufacturer, maybe doesn't get as much attention. But I think, I've looked at some of the videos that you guys have put out, and you're talking about adult, humans as well, and their susceptibility. And today, I think pets are, we offer some clothing and gear for pets. So we're trying to, broaden people's awareness about that too. Very nice. So if we're talking about pets, pretty much we're talking about dogs. I mean, it seems like, cats are not as susceptible. What do you say about that? I mean, if you're talking to people about their pets and ticks.
Well, from the veterinarian standpoint, I think it's important to recognize that most animals are actually going to be susceptible to a variety of tick-borne diseases. I think you're right. We largely talk about those diseases in dogs, and but we don't want to forget our cats. I have horses and cattle at my place too, and actually had ticks we were getting off the horses last night as we were finishing up chores, and so those are definitely a consideration for a variety of animals that people will bring in as pets. Cats and dogs, of course, more likely to be in the house with us than the horses and the calves, right? And so there's a closer interface usually between dogs and cats. People are more readily have them in their homes, on the furniture, in beds with them. And so it's, again, that exposure increases. I think it's important to recognize that although we do usually think of dogs as being that outdoor animal, right? That the exposure is greater for dogs, and certainly as compared to maybe an indoor only cat, I would find that to be accurate. But we have cats, of course, that are indoor outdoor cats, and cats that are exclusively outdoor. And there are a number of tick-borne diseases that they're susceptible to.
Okay. Right. So, Justin, I think I looked at some of your videos where, you were talking about the different kinds of diseases that pets might be susceptible to. And that's something that we haven't talked about that much on this, in our interviews. But I know that the black-legged tick, also called the deer tick, that's the one that carries Lyme. But there are a couple others, I think, that you mentioned, like American dog tick and the Lone Star tick. And these carry kind of their own kinds of insect-borne disease, right? We have to watch out for those.
Yeah, when we think about ticks, not all ticks are created equal. So when we think about this, you're going to look at these ticks and how they interact with their animal host and their environment. Most of the ticks, including the black-legged tick, were called multi-host ticks. So that means they're gonna, once they get a blood meal, they're gonna fall off that animal to digest that blood meal and then molt, or what we say, grow to the next stage. And that's what makes control complicated, because you're not just thinking about the ticks on the animal, you're thinking about the constant exposure of those animals to the tick population and in its environment. When we think about Lone Star ticks, that's Amblyomma americanum. That's very prevalent throughout the U.S. It used to be relegated to more of the southeastern parts, but we see it all the way up into Michigan now in some reports. So it's a tick that it's expanding. It's a little bit more aggressive in its biting activity, more so than our black-legged tick. And we're certainly concerned with ehrlichiosis, both canine ehrlichiosis and some other things. The main thing that we want to be worried about are the American dog tick is just some ehrlichiosis, some anaplasmosis. Anaplasmosis in dogs is prevalent throughout the U.S. And so, as well as canine ehrlichiosis, and both the American dog tick and Lone Star tick are involved with that. The black-legged tick is certainly involved in Lyme disease. We don't tend to see as much Lyme disease down here because the stage of the tick that's really involved in the transmission is feeding on reptiles down here.
Wow.
Versus like up in the Midwest and upper Northeast, and it's feeding on a mouse that's harboring the pathogen that causes Lyme disease.
Right. Right. And so there are kind of different areas where you need to watch out for the different kinds of ticks. And you said they're spreading. So this is something that we've heard a lot. Our primary audience is kind of up in the Northeast, where you would have thought like that's where the name of Lyme disease comes from. But it sounds like even ticks are spreading over into Canada now, and they're kind of spreading out from that area. So I don't know if this has caused a lot of more interest in your field in terms of like having to be more aware or spending more time on this. Yeah, what do you think?
Yes, certainly we see expansion of ticks into some areas that we don't traditionally see them a lot, but we also have some ticks that we think they're just becoming more active, in the sense that, like, there's a tick called the winter tick. It's Dermacentor albopictus, and it's been prevalent in Canada for a long time. And it can get on dogs. Where we usually see a lot of problems is it's closely related to the American dog tick. It's in the same genera. So it's involved in canine anaplasmosis as well. And so it's not only that we're seeing the expansion of certain ticks, but maybe the season of these ticks becoming more intense and a little bit longer
Right.
because of just the variable climate that we're in. We tend to see tick populations are expanding because of the conditions. The other thing that's involved is we have a lot of wooded habitat now. And so a lot of areas that traditionally didn't have wooded habitat, even in our area, like where it was just grassy plains, have become more woody in their environment, and especially on the eastern half of our state. And that's increasing our tick populations as
Okay.
well. So
Yeah.
it's kind of this interaction with the climate, the habitat modification, as well as the human interaction with those in those environments.
Right. I guess there are more preventive measures that you can take, like, Dr. Biggs, if you're talking about the pets in that realm, then what do you watch out for? Or I guess preventive stuff, and then the symptoms is something that also that we want to talk about. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the environment, I think historically we thought our friends to the north had it great. They didn't have ticks. I actually joked with Dr. Talley last spring. I said we had some really significantly cold weather here in Oklahoma. And I said, please tell me our ticks are going to be better than they were, because we went through, below freezing for extended period of time, pretty unusual for us. And he said, no, it's not gonna make a change for us. And he was right. We saw ticks after that and continue to see it really year round. So from the veterinary prevention standpoint, as a practitioner, my general recommendation is for cats and dogs in particular to be on preventatives year round. Both flea and tick preventatives, and we haven't really talked about it, but I know a number of your listeners will be interested in mosquito-borne, so we're worried about heartworms in both those species as well.
Right.
So it becomes, that's what I do for my pets. We have a variety of products, and it may be, you need to visit with your veterinarian is my recommendation for animal owners on what's appropriate for the particular conditions of your pet and their potential exposure, as well as the environment that they're interacting in. The thing that's important to remember, and Dr. Talley and I talk about this in our large animal species too, is as we see a variety of products, they're very effective products, but we also worry about resistance over time. And so just because a product was effective for me 10 years ago, it may not be the case now. And we're really taking a look at that, I think, across a variety of species in a number of areas of resistance and how we're going to look at that. But the core thing for me, as well as protection of my pets, as well as my family, is prevention year round, and the products that we have at our disposal to use those. And I feel confident that in those products and their effectiveness. It's much more cost effective. I think we see that from our animal owners that, hey, these are really expensive. Do I have to use it year round? And my recommendation is, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. In the long run, it's going to save on those dollars.
Right.
Classic signs we see, generally speaking, across most tick-borne diseases are going to be flu-like symptoms initially. That fever, inappetence. We can see vomiting and diarrhea a little bit. When we take a look at blood work, we see changes in those blood profiles, particularly anemia can be seen, or decrease in the platelet numbers. Those are kind of classic signs we would see around here. But long term, we can also see some real harm that goes to our major organ systems, particularly the kidney. Those are at risk, and we want to. The things that I would classically see in practice would be really high fevers, or animals that they just don't feel good. Inappetence, vomiting, diarrhea, anorexia, even as extreme as that. Weight loss can be there too. And so it's always a good idea at those annual visits with your veterinarian to not only do a heartworm test, but also consider doing a tick screening to see if we've had some exposure there as well.
Okay. And by inappetence, you mean loss of appetite? I want to just check her.
Not that regularly running to the food bowl and
Yeah.
cleaning up dinner. They just don't feel good. Maybe take a partial meal, or maybe not want to eat at all.
Yeah. That, I mean, dogs are often very excited about their food, even if it's the same every day, which is surprising. Cats, not so much.
Everybody's excited about it. And so those are signs, and they're real nondescript signs, right? Like there's nothing that says lights flashing, I have tick-borne disease. And so we may see things that are subtle, but they can certainly lead to, significant complications.
Right. So monitor and be sure to get them into a vet for regular checkups, and also to talk about the different preventatives that are available. Yeah. Okay, cool. Right. So I guess one thing that I read about is that there are much fewer cases of Lyme or tick-borne illness sort of in the Oklahoma or, that general Midwest area. But I did want to ask, because I've kind of seen this in other articles that I've read and stuff. It's like, well, they may be there, but they're just not being reported. I mean, that is a possibility, right? I don't know. What do you guys, Dr. Talley, what do you say about that?
Well, part of that goes into the tick biology. Like I said, our black-legged tick down here tends to feed on reptiles. And whereas up in the northern regions where we see more prevalence of Lyme, and both in humans and in pets, it's because the particular life stage of that tick is feeding on a particular type of mouse. And when you have that, it can change how prevalent it is and so forth. We also think there's what we call these two, we call them clades at this time. So they're the same species, but genetically something's going on. So we have a northern type species and a southern type species, if you want to call them that. And our black-legged tick down here tends to more fall in that southern type species, where they're feeding on those reptiles and other cold-blooded animals that are just not as they're not going to carry that pathogen like other systems do.
Right.
As far as tick-borne disease, even in Oklahoma, it's probably really underreported. And again, depending on what you're doing, especially with pets, I see that it's probably underreported quite a bit, unless it's just a very severe reaction. Like Dr. Biggs said, it's little things that you notice. Pets can recover from most of our tick-borne diseases even without a treatment, if they're on a good nutritional plane, and if you got them on a good diet, they're going to be okay. But when it comes to the ticks, I've got a colleague. We're testing ticks all the time, and we're not really detecting the pathogen that causes Lyme, but we certainly are detecting Ehrlichia, or spotted fever rickettsia is what we call it. Some people used to call that Rocky Mountain spotted fever, but there's more than one species now, so we call it spotted fever rickettsia. And our ticks down here certainly have that, and that's not just one particular tick species, it's across the board. It doesn't matter if it's the American dog tick, the Lone Star tick, or even the black-legged tick. We're detecting these pathogens down here. They're just not Lyme. And so at some point, I think down here, we just don't have what we call that perfect kind of nidus where everything is meeting together for Lyme disease to kind of be more prevalent. Whereas up in the Midwest and certainly in the Northeast, you have everything that's just right there. The tick vector, you have multiple animal hosts that can
Right.
harbor the pathogen, and plus the interaction with humans and pets.
Yeah, one of the people that we interviewed who is a big gardener up in the Northeast, and there are a lot of deer around her area, and she called them like the mass transit of ticks, you know, because
We call them tick bombs down here. So when we're doing tick research, tick trials, and we're trying to assess the environment and look out in the pasture, the first place we go to is the deer trail.
Okay.
And a lot of people, I have some neighbors that have a deer feeder in their backyard to bring the deer in. And I said, well, you're just bringing ticks in. So
Right.
yeah, I have a completely different way of thinking about deer.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I know. She you know, she sent us pictures or showed us pictures of her garden, which was fabulous. And then she had a picture of a deer, and I was like, oh, you know, that's really cute and also not so cute from the deer perspective, or the tick spreading perspective. So yeah, I think this has been great. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to fill us in on some of these questions. And I don't know if we have covered the idea that you really ought to get into your veterinarian, I think, probably more often. Do you have, I mean, one of the things that we found, some of the Lyme organizations that we work with, they say a lot of times it's hard to find doctors that are really aware. I mean, if you're in certain areas of the country, they're going to be more aware, but if you're not, you might have Lyme and misdiagnosis, you know, for like a year or more. And I think, Dr. Biggs, in terms of getting a pet, you know, into a vet, what are some of the challenges there? Or are there veterinarians that are more astute about the kinds of problems that ticks present?
Sure. We here at Oklahoma State have a big One Health focus of this human health and veterinary medicine and the environment and how all of that relates. I will generally say, in my experience, veterinarians are going to be very well versed when it comes to tick-borne diseases, because nearly every species we work on, regardless of whether that's a bird or a reptile or cats and dogs or horses and cattle or sheep and goats, you name it, ticks have a preference for a variety of those species. So in general, veterinarians are going to be very well versed at tick-borne diseases. In fact, I can give you a personal example. My husband spiked a fever, had some unusual presentations of signs, and we went into the doctor, and I said, "Are you sure did you all discuss tick-borne disease?" And he said, "Well, no, we didn't." And I said, why don't you go back in and talk? And so in my husband's medical record, it says veterinarian recommends testing for tick-borne disease. I didn't put that was his wife, but most veterinarians are going to be very well versed. That was in fact what my husband had. He responded very, very, very quickly and appropriately to the antibiotics that we would use in veterinary medicine, similarly that we would use in human medicine. But it is one of those things, you know, I think that Lyme disease gets a lot of headlines. We talk about it, we see it in the press a great deal. I think it's also important to recognize, you know, sorry, Dr. Talley, it's going to be hard for me to get changed on that Rocky Mountain spotted fever, but certainly ehrlichiosis. We have other tick-borne diseases that can cause problems in both animals and humans as well. And so we don't want to forget that. Cause very, very similar signs. And so in answer to your question, yeah, I think veterinarians overall are going to be very well versed in that. You're going to be able to guide you on the appropriate products for your particular situation and appropriate for your area too. They may find that one particular product is going to work better than another.
Yeah, yeah, that's really good to know. And so one other point, maybe Dr. Talley, you mentioned that you're seeing different kinds of ticks now that you probably weren't seeing before. So how does that factor into maybe those are harder to recognize, or how does that apply to the research that you're doing, these new ticks?
Well, one in particular tick that we're trying to look for that we haven't found in Oklahoma yet, but it's slowly spreading its way from the East Coast to the West, is the Asian longhorn tick, and Haemaphysalis longicornis. And it's we also run a tick rearing lab here, and that I'm a part of. And so we are making sure that we're rearing all the species that need to be reared for all of our industry partners, so that they can have access to this resource and test their products, as well as the CDC and any kind of academic partner. So when we do that, we're constantly communicating with these people kind of on the leading edge of some of this human pathogen work and tick-borne illness work. And again, what we're seeing is that it's again, the Asian longhorn tick is a new species of tick that we're concerned with. It causes problem in cattle, and it can cause some human issues if it gets established. But it's also the diversity within the species. Even in the brown dog tick, we see different genetic makeups within two different specific types of what we call clades of ticks. So again, we used to just, with our advanced tools, we can do a lot of genetic testing now and determine, well, there's maybe some genetics behind why certain ticks, even though they're the same species, are not feeding on the same animals they would if they're in, say, our area or up in the Northeast. And so it's not only the diversity of new ticks coming in, like new species coming in, that we're always concerned about. We're certainly always concerned about their reinfestation of Rhipicephalus microplus or Rhipicephalus annulatus, which is a cattle tick for cattle movement. But we're also looking at the genetic diversity within the species that is presenting some problems. And it presents the problems because some of these, they don't transmit these pathogens at the same rate as say, when we just grouped them all into the same species. It's like, oh, this is the same species. Well, morphologically, so on the outside, everything looks like a brown dog tick, but genetically, there's some slight differences that make them either less efficient or more efficient at transmitting pathogens.
Right.
Just like, we had an outbreak in Arizona that we usually don't see a lot of spotted fever or ketsiosis down there, and it's the brown dog tick that's involved. There's a big effort that went on down there that they essentially, the industry really jumped in and tried to help in making sure every pet is treated in these Native American villages and Native American communities, because we had a really high, not only morbidity, but mortality rate in this population down in Arizona, that we didn't ever see this pathogen before, and it's being transmitted by a different tick. So again, we're always concerned about the spread of tick-borne disease and how not only new species can bring things in, but how genetic differences even within the tick species can kind of either make it more prolific, a pathogen more prolific, or maybe not so much.
Yeah. That's really awesome. I mean, some of the other folks that we've talked to doing research in this area have talked about the same thing, and the kind of threats that ticks present. They're very efficient and highly evolved in terms of the ways that they spread. There's kind of this symbiosis between the pathogen and the tick, which you wouldn't have thought about, I guess. And so they kind of work together to do the damage that they're doing. Of course, none of them is really like trying to attack humans per se. That's just kind of how they, survive. But well, I thank you so much, both of you, Dr. Biggs and Dr. Talley, coming out from Oklahoma State University and making the trip to Seattle for us. Really nice to talk to you both. Thanks for your insights today, and we'll look forward to talking again, maybe sometime in the future.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah.
And we have leading experts right here with Dr. Talley, of course, and our veterinarians at the National Center for Veterinary Parasitology here at Oklahoma State. So we appreciate the opportunity to, on behalf of veterinary medicine as well as OSU Extension, to visit today.